The screaming started at 0347 Galactic Standard Time aboard the research vessel Kethmoran. Commander Zethkai of the Hegemony's 4th Scientific Fleet had been reviewing mineral surveys from the Outer Rim when the first attack came. The ship's bioluminescent corridors flickered as something massive struck their starboard hull, sending the crystalline captain tumbling across his command chamber. Emergency lights bathed everything in harsh amber, and the smell of ozone filled the recycled air. Report. Zethkai's voice cracked through his translator as he pulled himself upright using his 4 primary appendages. Unknown vessels, Commander, Communications Officer Velterra announced, her normally calm demeanor shattered. They appeared from nowhere. No identification signals, no response to our hails. The main display materialized before them, showing 3 angular ships unlike anything in their databases. Dark metal surfaces absorbed their scanning beams, and weapon ports glowed with malevolent energy. The ships moved with predatory grace, circling the Kethmoran like hunters sizing up wounded prey. Defensive screens to maximum, Zethkai ordered. All non-essential personnel to emergency shelters. The second impact nearly breached their hull. Sparks erupted from control panels as the ship's defensive grid strained against weapons that shouldn't exist. Through the viewports, crew members watched in horror as one of the attacking ships fired a beam that seemed to devour light itself. Science Officer Polneth frantically worked at his station, his 6 arms dancing across holographic interfaces. Commander, their technology is beyond our understanding. Those aren't plasma weapons or particle beams. It's something else entirely. Another blast rocked the ship. This time, the lights didn't come back on in Section C. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically as atmosphere began venting into space. 23 researchers and technicians were trapped on the wrong side. Send out the distress call, Zethkai commanded, his bioluminescent skin patterns shifting to deep purple with stress. All frequencies, maximum range. Velterra's tentacles worked desperately at her console. Standard hegemony emergency protocols activated, sir. Broadcasting our location and situation. Include everything, the commander said grimly as another impact shook them. Ship specifications, attacker profiles, everything. If we don't survive this, someone needs to know what happened here. The Kethmoran limped through space, her hull breached in 17 places. Of her original crew of 247 beings from 12 different species, only 191 remained. The attackers had stopped their assault after crippling the research vessel, content to let her drift while they waited. For what? Nobody knew. Days passed. The ship's environmental systems strained to keep the survivors alive. Food synthesizers failed one by one. The medical bay overflowed with injured crew members whose wounds festered in the recycled air. Hope faded like their emergency power cells. No response to our distress call, Velterra reported on the 4th day. Her once vibrant purple skin had turned a sickly gray. We're too far from any major shipping lanes. Zethkai nodded slowly. The hegemony stretched across thousands of light years, encompassing hundreds of worlds and countless species, but they had been exploring virgin space far beyond their borders when the attack came. The nearest outpost was 3 weeks away at maximum warp, assuming anyone even received their call. Sir, Navigation Officer Yixtao spoke up from his station. The attackers are moving. They're taking position around us in a defensive pattern. Defensive? Against what? Before anyone could answer, space itself seemed to tear open. Not the gentle unfolding of a hyperspace emergence or the swirling vortex of a wormhole. This was violent, chaotic, like reality had been grabbed and twisted until it snapped. From the rift emerged ships that defied easy description. They were angular where the hegemony preferred curves, brutal where others sought elegance. Weapons bristled from every surface, and their hulls bore scars from countless battles. Most unsettling of all, they moved with purpose that spoke of intelligence behind their construction. New contacts, Polneth announced unnecessarily. Everyone could see them on the main display. 12 vessels of unknown configuration. They're not in our databases either. The mysterious attackers who had crippled them suddenly didn't seem so confident. Their formation tightened as they turned to face the newcomers. Energy readings spiked as both sides powered weapons. Are they communicating? Zethkai asked. Nothing on standard frequencies, Velterra replied. But I'm detecting some kind of tight beam transmission between the new arrivals. The first shot came from the original attackers. A beam of dark energy that had nearly destroyed the Kethmoran lanced out toward the nearest newcomer. The target ship rolled with impossible agility, the deadly beam missing by mere meters. Its response was immediate and devastating. Projectile weapons. Actual physical projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The impact on the attacker's hull created a brief new star as kinetic energy converted to heat and radiation. When the glare faded, the alien ship was gone. Impossible, Polneth whispered. Those were solid rounds. In space combat, the energy requirements alone should make it impractical. But, impractical or not, the newcomers were winning. Their ships moved like living things, coordinating attacks with precision that spoke of long experience fighting together. More projectile weapons fired, along with directed energy beams that cut through the attackers' hulls like they were made of soft metal. In 15 minutes, it was over. The mysterious attackers who had terrorized the Kethmoran for days were reduced to expanding clouds of debris and cooling plasma. One of the newcomer ships approached slowly. It was massive, easily twice the size of the research vessel, and covered in armor plating that showed the scars of many battles. As it drew closer, details became visible that made several crew members step back from the viewports. The hull was decorated with symbols that could only be called tribal. Fierce angular designs that seemed to move in peripheral vision. And there, painted in stark white against dark metal, was something that made HFY's translator struggle to find words. A skull with crossed bones beneath it. Incoming transmission, Velterra announced with surprise. It's on standard hegemony frequencies. Put it through. The main display flickered and resolved into an image that sent murmurs of shock through the bridge crew. The being looking back at them was clearly sapient, but unlike anything in the hegemony's vast xenobiological databases. Bipedal, with only 4 limbs total. Skin that was pale pink instead of the more common blue or green. Most disturbing of all, small eyes set in a face that showed clear predator evolution. When it spoke, the voice was rough, gravelly, and somehow conveyed confidence despite coming through a translator. This is Colonel Sarah Chun of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Unit, Earth Defense Force. We received your distress call. The being paused, and HFY could swear he saw the corners of its mouth turn upward in what his cultural database suggested might be a smile. Someone mentioned they needed help with a pirate problem. Behind her, other figures moved in what was clearly a military environment. They wore uniforms of mottled green and brown, and many carried weapons that looked disturbingly similar to the projectile launchers their ships had used so effectively. I am Commander HFY of the Hegemony Research Vessel Kethmoran, he managed to say. You are human? That's right. And don't worry about those ships that were giving you trouble. We've handled worse at our breakfast table. Colonel Chin's expression grew more serious. Your distress call mentioned casualties and hull breaches. Do you need immediate medical assistance? We have many injured, and our life support systems are failing. Copy that. We're sending over a rescue team with medical supplies and emergency atmosphere units. Fair warning, though, they're Marines. They're not big on ceremony, but they'll get the job done. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge crew in stunned silence. Finally, Polneth spoke what they were all thinking. Where did they come from? How did they get here so fast? More importantly, HFY added quietly, what kind of species builds ships like that and calls rescue operations breakfast conversation? An hour later, they had their first answer. The human rescue team arrived in small, heavily armed craft that somehow managed to dock with their crippled vessel despite the hull damage. The boarding airlock cycled, and the first human stepped through. She was tall by hegemony standards, wearing armor that looked both protective and practical. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a tight configuration, and her eyes moved constantly, assessing threats with the efficiency of a born predator. Behind her came others, carrying equipment and supplies with military precision. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, 3rd Marines, she announced. I understand you folks have had a rough few days. What followed was a display of efficiency that left the hegemony crew speechless. The humans moved through their damaged ship with practiced ease, setting up emergency atmosphere generators and portable medical stations. They worked without complaint in areas where toxic gases leaked from broken systems, protected by armor that their own engineers couldn't fully understand. The human medics were perhaps the most remarkable. They quickly adapted their equipment to treat species they had never encountered before, using scanners and medical devices that seemed far more advanced than their deliberately primitive-looking ship suggested. How are you doing this? Dr. Kavlin asked as a human medic successfully treated her assistant's radiation poisoning. Your scanner shouldn't be able to read Thraxian physiology. The medic, a compact human with steady hands and kind eyes, looked up from her work. Standard first aid training includes xenobiology modules for over 300 species. You pick things up when you've been doing this as long as we have. 300 species? How is that possible? Our own databases only include 37 that we've had extensive contact with. The medic's expression grew thoughtful. Yeah, we've gotten around a bit. The galaxy's a big place, and somebody's always getting into trouble somewhere. As the hours passed, the Kethmoran slowly returned to something approaching normal function. Human engineers worked alongside hegemony technicians to patch hull breaches and restore critical systems. They never complained about the unfamiliar technology or the difficulty of adapting their equipment to alien systems. More importantly, they never asked for anything in return. During the third day of repairs, Zethkai found himself in conversation with Colonel Chun, who had come aboard to personally assess their situation. They sat in his ready room, sharing a meal of human field rations that were surprisingly palatable. Your people have been remarkably generous, he said carefully. Such assistance usually comes with expectations. Colonel Chun shrugged, a gesture his translator interpreted as casual dismissal. Not our way. You were in trouble. We helped. That's what decent beings do for each other. But surely your government expects some form of compensation? Trade agreements? Technology sharing? The human laughed, and the sound was surprisingly warm. Commander, we've been exploring space for 2 centuries now. We've learned that the universe is a dangerous place, and the only way any of us survive is by watching out for each other. She leaned back in her chair, her expression growing more serious. Those ships that attacked you, we've seen them before. They call themselves the Devourers, and they've been working their way through this sector for months. They hit isolated ships and research stations, always far from help. You've fought them before? 3 times. They're tough, but they rely too much on their energy weapons. Getting close with kinetic rounds, and their advantages disappear. Chin's smile returned, but this time it held no warmth. They won't be bothering anyone anymore. How did you respond so quickly to our distress call? We transmitted for days before you arrived. We didn't receive your call until yesterday. We were already in the area, hunting the Devourers. The colonel's expression grew thoughtful. Funny thing about space pirates, they always follow the same patterns. Hit the isolated targets, avoid anything that might fight back, keep moving to stay ahead of retaliation. So you predicted where they would strike next? More or less. We've been tracking them for weeks, and your research mission fit their usual target profile perfectly. Chun stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the human ships maintaining guard positions around them. The thing about bullies is they're only dangerous until someone stands up to them. That evening, as repairs continued, Zethkai called his senior staff together for a briefing. The humans had been aboard for 3 days, and their presence had transformed not just the ship's condition, but the entire mood of the crew. Observations, he asked simply. Their technology is paradoxical, Polneth said immediately. Those ships look primitive, but their sensors are more sophisticated than ours. Their weapons appear to be simple projectile launchers, but the targeting systems required for their accuracy are beyond our current capabilities. They're warriors, Security Chief Mordak added. His own species had a proud military tradition, but he seemed genuinely impressed by the humans. Not just soldiers, warriors. There's a difference. Soldiers follow orders and use tactics. Warriors fight with their souls. Their medical knowledge is extraordinary, Dr. Kavlin contributed. They've successfully treated 17 different species aboard our ship, some of which they claim to have never encountered before. Yet they adapted their procedures within hours. And they asked for nothing, Valterra said quietly. In 3 days of constant assistance, not one human has requested payment, information, or even basic courtesy. They simply help. Zethki nodded slowly. In his 40 years of space exploration, he had encountered many species. Some were generous, others calculating, most were simply indifferent. But he had never met beings who seemed to consider helping others their default behavior. There's something else, he said. I've been monitoring their communications. They refer to this as a routine patrol action. The implications hung in the air. Routine, as if rescuing stranded ships and fighting off pirates was something they did regularly. As if saving lives was just part of their normal duties. Sir, Polneff ventured. With your permission, I would like to request access to their historical databases. If they've encountered over 300 species, their exploration records could revolutionize our understanding of the galaxy. Granted, but remember, we're in their debt, not the other way around. Actually, Sir Dr. Kavlin interrupted. I asked Corpsman Martinez about that earlier. She said humans don't keep track of debts when it comes to helping people. She said what was the phrase? Just common decency. The meeting continued for another hour, but Zethkai's mind kept returning to those words. Common decency, as if risking their lives to save strangers was simply the normal, expected behavior for their species. That night, he stood in his quarters looking out at the human fleet. Their ships maintained perfect formation, sensors constantly sweeping space for threats. They had appointed themselves guardians without being asked, protectors without expecting reward. For the first time in days, Commander Zethkai began to believe that perhaps the galaxy was not as dark and dangerous as it seemed. Perhaps, somewhere among the stars, there were beings who would always answer a distress call, no matter the cost. Outside his window, the human ships continued their silent vigil, their crews ready to step out of the smoke once more whenever someone needed help. The rescue was complete, but Zethkai suspected this was only the beginning of a much larger story. The Kethmoran limped into hegemony space 6 days later, escorted by the human fleet like a wounded animal protected by a pack of apex predators. News of the rescue had preceded them, transmitted through quantum relay networks that span the galaxy. By the time they reached Sanctuary Station, the massive orbital facility was buzzing with activity. Admiral Kexthan of the Hegemony Defense Force stood in the station's observation deck, watching the approaching vessels through reinforced transparent steel. His aide, a young Valerian named Silmoth, held a datapad containing preliminary reports that grew more unbelievable with each update. Confirm those weapons specifications again, the Admiral ordered, his scaled hide rippling with agitation. Kinetic projectiles, sir. Solid metal rounds accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. No exotic matter, no subspace manipulation, no zero-point energy extraction. Silmoth's voice carried a note of disbelief. They're using bullets, sir, and they destroyed 3 Devourer ships with bullets? In 15 minutes, according to Commander Zethkai's report, Admiral Kex then had fought the Devourers twice before. Both encounters had been disasters. Their energy-absorbing hulls and reality-warping weapons had cut through hegemony fleets like they were ceremonial parade formations. The Defense Force had been developing countermeasures for 3 years without success, and these humans had simply shot them. What do we know about their civilization? The Admiral asked. Very little, sir. They claim to represent something called the Earth Defense Force, but they've been deliberately vague about their territorial boundaries and population centers. Silmoth consulted his pad again. However, communications has been monitoring their internal chatter. They refer to multiple fleet deployments, patrol sectors, and ongoing operations across what appears to be a significant portion of the galaxy. How significant? Unknown, sir. But they mentioned a 7th Fleet action near the Magellanic Clouds, and something about 3rd Army operations in the Andromeda Advance Zones. The Admiral's primary eyes widened. The Magellanic Clouds were satellite galaxies. Andromeda was elsewhere entirely. If the humans were operating on that scale, the hegemony's territory would be barely a rounding error in their calculations. Sir, Silmoth continued, there's something else. The humans have requested permission to establish what they call a forward logistics base at coordinates they've provided. It's an unclaimed space, roughly 3 light years from our outer border. For what purpose? Anti-piracy operations, sir. They say this sector has been experiencing increased Devourer activity, and they want to position response forces closer to potential target areas. Admiral Kex then considered this. On the surface, it seemed reasonable. The humans had proven they could handle the Devourers effectively. Having them nearby would provide security for hegemony shipping. But it also meant having an unknown alien military force positioned just outside their territory. What does the Council think? The Council is divided, sir. The scientists want full diplomatic contact and technology exchange. The military is cautious about potential threats. The traders are already calculating profit margins from potential commerce agreements. Through the observation deck windows, the human fleet was now close enough to make out individual details. Their ships still looked primitive compared to hegemony designs, but there was something unsettling about their obvious functionality. Every line suggested purpose. Every weapon mount spoke of hard-won experience. "Sir," Communications Officer Tarvan announced from his station, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. It's Colonel Chun requesting permission to come aboard for diplomatic discussions." "Granted." And Silmoth, assemble a full briefing team. "I want xenobiologists, linguists, military analysts, and someone from trade relations." "Yes, sir. Shall I also request someone from intelligence?" Admiral Kexthen's laugh was bitter. "What intelligence? We know nothing about them except that they answer distress calls and kill pirates. Might as well ask the station's cleaning crew for strategic analysis." An hour later, Colonel Sarah Chun stepped off a human shuttlecraft and into one of the most sophisticated space stations in hegemony space. If she was impressed by the crystalline architecture or the gravity-defying atriums, she didn't show it. Instead, she moved with the same calm professionalism she had displayed during the rescue operation. Admiral Kex then met her in Conference Room Alpha, a space designed to accommodate multiple species with varying environmental needs. The room's adaptive atmosphere system adjusted automatically as the human entered, providing optimal air mixture and pressure. "Colonel Chun," the Admiral said formally, "welcome to Sanctuary Station. I am Admiral Kexthan of the Hegemony Defense Force." "Admiral," Chun nodded respectfully. "Thank you for the warm welcome. Though I have to say, your station is impressive. The architectural integration alone must have taken decades to plan." It was a diplomatic opening, acknowledging their achievement without seeming overly impressed. Admiral Kex then found himself liking this human despite his reservations. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." The conference table adapted as Chun approached, extruding a chair configured for human physiology. She settled into it with apparent comfort, though Kex then noticed her posture remained alert. "First," the Admiral began, "the hegemony owes your people a debt of gratitude for rescuing the Keth Moran and her crew." "No debt necessary," Chun replied immediately, "though we appreciate the sentiment. Still, such actions deserve recognition. We would like to offer trade agreements, technology exchanges, perhaps establishment of formal diplomatic relations." Chin's expression became thoughtful. "That's generous, Admiral, but Earth policy on first contact situations requires a more gradual approach. We prefer to let relationships develop naturally rather than jumping into formal treaties." "How many first contact situations has Earth encountered?" The question slipped out before Kex then could stop himself, and he immediately regretted it. Intelligence gathering masked as casual conversation was transparent and potentially insulting. But Chin simply smiled. "Quite a few, actually. We've learned that every species has their own way of viewing the galaxy, and rushing into agreements often leads to misunderstandings later." She leaned forward slightly. "What we can offer immediately is the anti-piracy patrol base I mentioned. The Devourers aren't the only hostile group operating in this region, and having response forces nearby would benefit everyone." "What would such a base require?" "Minimal footprint. A small station for supplies and maintenance, maybe a dozen ships rotating through on patrol duty. We'd handle our own logistics and security." Chun paused. "And, of course, we'd share intelligence on hostile activities with your defense force." Intelligence sharing. Kexton's aide had been right to suggest bringing someone from intelligence services, but they had no one with expertise in human psychology or communication patterns. "May I ask about your military structure? We're curious about how Earth organizes its defense forces." "Marine Corps is expeditionary," Chin explained. "We handle rapid response, first contact situations, anti-piracy operations, that sort of thing. Each fleet carries a Marine detachment for situations that require ground forces or close-quarters combat." "And your fleet deployments?" We detected references to multiple operational areas. Chin's smile became slightly more guarded. "Earth takes galactic security seriously, Admiral. There are a lot of civilizations out there that can't necessarily defend themselves against every threat that comes along." The implications were staggering. Earth didn't just have one fleet operating in local space. They had multiple fleets operating across multiple galaxies, providing security for civilizations that couldn't defend themselves. How long has Earth been exploring space? About 2 centuries, give or take. We started small, obviously. Solar system, then nearby stars, gradually working our way outward. Chen shrugged. You know how it is. Every time you think you've found the edge of the universe, you discover there's more universe beyond it. 2 centuries. The hegemony had been spacefaring for over 800 years, and they controlled barely 1,000 systems. In 2 centuries, these humans had apparently spread across multiple galaxies. Colonel, Admiral Kex then said carefully, May I speak frankly? Please do. Your people's capabilities seem far beyond what we initially assessed. Ships that can destroy devour vessels, medical knowledge spanning hundreds of species, military forces deployed across galactic distances. Yet you present yourselves as simply responding to a distress call. Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Admiral, the galaxy is a dangerous place. Always has been, probably always will be. Civilizations rise and fall, species evolve and go extinct, empires expand and collapse. But throughout all of that, there are always beings who just want to live their lives in peace. She gestured toward the window, where the Kethmoran was visible being repaired in one of the station's maintenance bays. Those researchers weren't exploring space to conquer anyone or exploit anything. They were trying to understand the universe a little better. When someone like that sends out a distress call and you have the ability to help, you help. That's not strategy or politics or diplomacy. That's just being decent. But your people have built what appears to be a massive military infrastructure. Because being decent doesn't work if you can't back it up, Chen finished. There are species out there that see kindness as weakness, cooperation as vulnerability. The Devourers are just one example. So yes, we build ships and train soldiers and maintain fleets. Not because we want to fight, but because sometimes fighting is the only way to protect the people who can't protect themselves. The conference room fell silent. Outside the windows, human ships maintained their protective formation around the station, their crews undoubtedly running routine maintenance and preparation drills. Professional, competent, ready. Your request for a patrol base, Admiral Kex then said finally. The Hegemony Council will need to vote, but I believe I can guarantee approval. Thank you, Admiral. We'll keep the footprint small and coordinate all operations with your defense force. One more question, if I may. You mentioned Earth policy on first contact. How many civilizations has Earth encountered? Chen's smile returned, but this time it held something that might have been pride. Active diplomatic relations with 417 species across 11 galaxies. Trade agreements with 206. Defense pacts with 83. She paused. And we've responded to over 2,000 distress calls in the last 50 years. The numbers hit Admiral Kex then like a physical blow. The hegemony prided itself on being one of the galaxy's major powers. They maintained relationships with 37 species and controlled trade routes spanning dozens of sectors. Earth was operating on a scale that made the hegemony look like a neighborhood association. Admiral, Chung continued, I hope you'll understand why we prefer to take things slowly. We've learned that rushing into formal relationships often creates problems that could have been avoided with a little patience. Of course, though I suspect the Council will want to accelerate our own diplomatic timeline. They're welcome to try. We'll be around. After Colonel Chen left, Admiral Kex then stood alone in the conference room, staring out at the human fleet. In the space of one conversation, his understanding of the galaxy had been fundamentally altered. The hegemony wasn't a major power. They weren't even a significant regional authority. They were a small local government that had just been noticed by something vast and benevolent. His aide returned with preliminary analysis from the xenobiology team. Dr. Velshin had spent hours examining human physiology data provided by their medics, and her conclusions were disturbing. Admiral, these beings evolved as pursuit predators on a world with higher gravity than most inhabited systems. Their bone density, muscle structure, and cardiovascular systems are all optimized for sustained physical exertion under hostile conditions. Meaning, they're built for warfare, sir. Not just mentally or culturally, but physically. Their natural evolutionary path led to beings who excel at tracking, enduring hardship, and operating effectively in dangerous environments. And yet they spend their time rescuing strangers and fighting pirates. Yes, sir. It's puzzling. Admiral Kex then thought about Colonel Chen's words about decency and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Perhaps it wasn't puzzling at all. Perhaps it was the most natural thing in the universe. A predator species that had learned to hunt those who hurt the innocent. That night, as Admiral Kex then prepared his report for the Hegemony Council, he found himself struggling with how to explain what had happened. How do you tell your government that they had just encountered a civilization so powerful that their response to discovering new species was to immediately begin protecting them? How do you explain that somewhere among the stars, there were beings who had turned violence into a tool for preserving peace? Outside his office window, the human ships maintained their silent watch, their crews ready to answer the next distress call, ready to step out of the smoke once more whenever someone needed help. And Admiral Kex then realized that for the first time in his career, he felt truly safe. 3 months after first contact, the human patrol base designated Haven Station was operational and already proving its worth. Built in record time, using modular construction techniques that impressed even hegemony engineers, the facility consisted of a central hub surrounded by docking rings, maintenance bays, and defensive platforms that looked deceptively simple. Captain Marcus Webb of the EDF Cruiser Determination stood in the station's command center, reviewing patrol reports with his hegemony liaison, Commander Yixtao. The Thraxian officer had been assigned to coordinate operations between human and hegemony forces, a job that initially seemed straightforward. It hadn't been. Another merchant convoy requesting escort through the Kalar Nebula, Yixtao reported, his 4 arms manipulating multiple data interfaces simultaneously. That's the 7th request this week. Pirates? Webb asked. Unknown. But ships have been disappearing in that region for the past month. No distress calls, no debris fields, nothing. They just vanish. Webb nodded grimly. The Kalar Nebula was a massive stellar formation that provided excellent cover for ambush attacks. The hegemony had avoided it for years, routing their shipping around the obstacle rather than through it. But that added weeks to shipping times and significant costs to trade routes. Sensor readings? Nothing useful. The nebula interferes with most scanning systems. Whatever's in there, it knows how to stay hidden. Captain Webb studied the tactical display, noting shipping lanes and potential approach vectors. In his 20 years of service, he had learned to trust patterns over speculation. Ships didn't just disappear randomly, and pirates didn't usually operate without leaving some trace. Pull up the disappearance reports, he ordered. All of them, going back 6 months. The holographic display shifted, showing a 3-dimensional map of the region with red markers indicating lost vessels. At first glance, the patterns seemed random. Ships from different species, carrying various cargoes, following different routes. But Webb had learned to look deeper. Computer analyzed timing intervals between disappearances and correlate with local astronomical events. The AI processing was instantaneous. New data overlays appeared, showing stellar positions, gravitational anomalies, and energy emissions. Suddenly, the pattern became clear. There, Webb pointed to a cluster of readings near the nebula's core. Every disappearance coincides with increased gravitational distortion in that sector. Something big is moving around in there. How big? Yixtao asked. Big enough to affect local space-time. We're not dealing with pirates in fast attack craft. This is something else entirely. Webb turned to his communications officer. Give me the Indomitable and the Resolute. Tell them to prep for deep space reconnaissance. And send a message to Admiral Chun. We may have found something that requires more than routine patrol action. The response came back within hours. Admiral Sarah Chun, now commanding the 5th Expeditionary Fleet from her flagship Unconquerable, authorized a full investigation. More importantly, she was coming personally to oversee the operation. Sir, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported from the sensor station, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the nebula's core. Whatever's in there, it's powering up. Webb moved to the tactical display, studying the readings. Energy output was climbing rapidly, reaching levels that suggested either a massive industrial operation or weapons systems preparing to fire. All ships, battle stations. Launch reconnaissance drones with full sensor suites. I want to know what we're dealing with before Admiral Chen arrives. The drones launched smoothly from Haven Station's deployment bays, their advanced sensor packages designed to penetrate most forms of interference. As they approached the nebula's outer edges, their telemetry began painting a picture that made Captain Webb's blood run cold. "Sir," the sensor operator announced, his voice tight with concern, "Drone 7 is detecting metallic structures within the nebula. Large ones." "How large?" "Preliminary estimates suggest ships, sir. Multiple vessels ranging from cruiser size to—" The operator paused, rechecking his readings, "to something approximately 15 kilometers in length." Yixtal's scaled hide rippled with shock. 15 kilometers? That's larger than our biggest orbital platforms. "And it's moving," Webb added grimly. "Plot intercept courses for all detected vessels. I want to know where they're heading." The tactical computer processed the data quickly. Red trajectory lines appeared on the display, showing the projected paths of the unknown fleet. All vectors pointed toward the same destination, the heavily populated hegemony trade hub of New Thessia. "How many people live on New Thessia?" Webb asked. 47 million, Yixtal replied quietly, plus another 12 million in the orbital habitats and industrial platforms. Captain Webb had seen enough warfare to recognize a setup when he encountered one. The missing merchant ships hadn't been random piracy. They had been intelligence gathering. Someone had been studying hegemony shipping patterns, defensive capabilities, and, most importantly, target selection. "Send emergency alerts to New Thessia and all surrounding systems," he ordered. "Tell them to activate all defensive measures and prepare for possible evacuation. Then, give me a direct line to Admiral Chun." The communication established connection just as Admiral Chen's flagship dropped out of hyperspace. The Unconquerable was a massive vessel, bristling with weapons and carrying a full marine complement. Behind it came 6 more ships of similar configuration, their hulls scarred from countless battles. "Captain Webb." Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main display. "Sitrep. Unknown fleet concealed in the Kalar Nebula. Admiral. At least 12 vessels, including something the size of a small moon. They're moving toward New Thessia, and we have reason to believe they've been studying hegemony shipping for months." "Hegemony defense capabilities?" Webb glanced at Yixtal, who stepped forward reluctantly. "Minimal, Admiral," the Thraxian officer admitted. 3 patrol cruisers and an orbital defense platform. They weren't designed for fleet action against vessels of this size. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but Webb caught the subtle tightening around her eyes that meant she was running tactical calculations. "Estimated time to target?" 18 hours at current velocity, Webb replied. "Then, we need to end this in 17 hours. Captain Webb, take your squadron and begin harassing attacks on their perimeter vessels. Don't try to engage directly, just slow them down and gather intelligence." "Yes, ma'am. I'll take the main fleet directly into the nebula. If they want to fight, we'll give them one on our terms instead of theirs." The transmission ended, leaving Captain Webb staring at the tactical display. The human fleet was impressive, but they were heavily outnumbered by an enemy of unknown capabilities operating from concealment in hazardous space. "Captain," Yixtal said quietly, "may I speak frankly?" "Go ahead. Your people are brave, but this seems like suicide. Those ships are massive, and we have no idea what kind of weapons they carry." Webb smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded Yixtal of Colonel Chen's confidence during the Keth Moran rescue. "Commander, let me tell you something about humans. We've been fighting impossible odds for our entire history. It's kind of our specialty." 6 hours later, the battle began. Captain Webb's squadron emerged from hyperspace at the nebula's edge, immediately launching sensor probes and targeting arrays. The enemy fleet was larger than their initial estimates, 17 ships in total, with a massive command vessel protected by a screen of heavily armed escorts. "Unknown vessels," Webb transmitted on all frequencies. "You are approaching hegemony space with apparent hostile intent. Identify yourselves and state your purpose." The response came in the form of energy beams that lit up the nebula like a small star. Whatever weapons these ships carried, they were powerful enough to boil away chunks of the Determination's armor plating from maximum range. "Evasive maneuvers," Webb ordered. "Return fire, all weapons." The human ships scattered like startled fish, but their movement was coordinated and purposeful. Kinetic rounds and energy beams lanced out toward the enemy fleet, most missing due to range and the nebula's interference, but a few finding their marks. The results were disappointing. The enemy ships' hulls seemed to absorb damage without significant effect. Worse, their return fire was devastatingly accurate despite the sensor interference. Sir, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, enemy weapons appear to be some form of dark energy manipulation. They're not just hitting our hulls, they're disrupting our power systems and causing cascade failures in our electronics. Damage report: hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Engineering reports power fluctuations in the main reactor. We're losing sensor resolution. Webb cursed silently. These weren't pirates or raiders. This was a full military fleet using technology that the human fleet wasn't equipped to handle effectively. All ships fall back to secondary positions. Launch all remaining sensor drones and transmit data to Admiral Chen. As the squadron withdrew, Webb watched the enemy fleet continue its inexorable advance toward New Thessia. Whatever these beings wanted, they had the firepower to take it by force. Then, space erupted in brilliant light as Admiral Chen's fleet arrived. The Unconquerable and her escorts dropped out of hyperspace, not at the nebula's edge, but directly within it, emerging from jump points that should have been impossible to calculate. Suddenly, the enemy fleet found themselves surrounded by human vessels that had somehow navigated through hazardous space with pinpoint accuracy. All ships, weapons free. Admiral Chen's voice carried across all channels. Priority targets are the escort vessels. Isolate that command ship. What followed was unlike anything Yixtao had ever witnessed. The human fleet moved with coordination that seemed almost telepathic, their ships flowing through the nebula's dangerous currents like they had been born there. More importantly, their weapons had changed. Instead of conventional kinetic rounds, the human ships were firing projectiles that pulsed with contained energy fields. When they struck the enemy vessels, the results were catastrophic. Hull plating that had shrugged off earlier attacks now cracked and splintered under the assault. Captain Webb, Admiral Chen's voice came over the comm. What are you seeing from your position? The enemy fleet is breaking formation, Admiral. 3 escort vessels destroyed, 2 more heavily damaged. But that command ship is still operational, and it's... Webb paused as his sensors registered something impossible. Ma'am, it's launching smaller vessels. Thousands of them. The tactical display filled with red contacts as fighter-sized craft poured from the massive command vessel like angry insects. They moved with deadly purpose toward both the human fleet and, more ominously, toward New Thessia. Admiral, Yixtao spoke up on the command frequency. Those aren't fighters. Our sensors are reading life signs. They're boarding pods. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't just an attack. It was an invasion. The massive fleet had been carrying an army, and now that army was deploying toward the helpless population of New Thessia. All ships, Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos. Ignore the command vessel. Priority target is now the invasion fleet. Every boarding pod we miss means civilians die. The human fleet pivoted with fluid precision, their weapons tracking the thousands of small craft, now racing through space. Point defense systems that had been designed to stop incoming missiles now targeted the boarding pods with mechanical efficiency. But there were too many of them. For every pod destroyed, 3 more slipped through the defensive net. The mathematics were simple and brutal. They couldn't stop them all. Admiral, Captain Webb transmitted, we need to evacuate New Thessia. Even if we stop 90% of those pods, the remaining 10% will overwhelm their defenses. Negative, Captain. Evacuating 47 million people would take days, and we don't have hours. We're going to have to do this the hard way. Ma'am, Admiral Chen's smile was visible even over the communication link, and it was the expression of a predator who had just decided to stop playing with her prey. We're going to board that command ship, and this at the source. Marines, prepare for combat insertion. It's time to remind the galaxy why you don't threaten innocent people when humans are in the neighborhood. The assault shuttles launched from the Unconquerable like bullets fired from a rifle, their armored hulls gleaming as they crossed the battlefield between the human fleet and the massive enemy command ship. Inside the lead craft, Gunnery Sergeant Maria Santos checked her weapon for the 3rd time while her squad of Marines performed final equipment inspections. 2 minutes to target, the pilot announced over the comm system. Defensive fire is getting heavy out here, Gunny. Just get us to that ship, Flyboy, Santos replied. We'll handle the rest. Through the shuttle's small viewport, she could see the enemy command vessel growing larger. Up close, its size was overwhelming. Easily 15 kilometers of dark metal-covered and weapon installations, and what appeared to be organic growth patterns. Worst of all, it was still launching boarding pods toward New Thesha despite the human fleet's devastating counterfire. Behind her, Private Jackson was reviewing the mission briefing on his tactical display. Gunny, this thing is the size of a small city. How are we supposed to find their command center? Same way we always do, Jackson. We follow the shooting until we find whoever's in charge. Then, we ask them politely to surrender. Santos's grin was predatory, and if they decline our request, we get impolite. The shuttle shuddered as enemy point defense systems found their range. Red warning lights flashed as the pilot threw them into evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible without artificial gravity systems. 30 seconds, the pilot called out. Cutting thrust in 5, 4, 3. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic screech that reverberated through both hulls. Santos felt the familiar moment of transition as the shuttle's artificial gravity synchronized with the enemy ship's field. Then, the assault doors blew outward in a cascade of sparks and debris. Marines! Move, move, move. Santos was first through the breach, her assault rifle tracking for targets as her squad flowed behind her into what appeared to be a cargo bay. The atmosphere was breathable, but thick with an oily mist that made everything seem slightly out of focus. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows between massive containers that stretched up into the darkness above. Clear left, Corporal Martinez reported. Clear right, Private Johnson added. Then, let's find some natives to talk to, Santos ordered. Remember, our job is to stop those boarding pods. Whatever it takes. They moved through the cargo bay with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated through years of training and combat experience. The ship's interior was unlike anything in their databases, corridors that seemed to shift and bend in impossible directions, walls covered in what might have been circuitry or veins, and a persistent low-frequency humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Gunny, Martinez whispered as they approached a major intersection. We've got movement ahead. Multiple contacts. Santos hand signaled for the squad to take defensive positions. Through her helmet's enhanced optics, she could see shapes moving in the corridor beyond. They were bipedal, but wrong somehow, as if someone had tried to build humanoid forms from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. Contact front, Jackson called out as the first enemy rounded the corner. The firefight was brief and brutal. The enemy beings carried energy weapons that fired beams of the same dark energy the ship had used against the human fleet. Where those beams struck, armor plating didn't just melt, it seemed to cease existing entirely. But the Marines had trained for exotic weapons encounters. They moved with fluid coordination, using cover and superior tactics to overcome technological advantages. Their kinetic rounds punched through enemy defenses with devastating effect. Secure the intersection, Santos ordered as the last enemy fell. Martinez, see if you can interface with their systems. We need to find their command center. The corporal approached what appeared to be a control interface, though it looked more like a living organism than technology. This is unlike anything I've seen, Gunny. It's responding to touch, but the interface is completely alien. Keep trying. Jackson, Johnson, set up a perimeter. Something tells me that was just the welcoming committee. As if summoned by her words, the ship's lighting shifted to a pulsing red pattern, and new sounds echoed from the corridors ahead. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets, moving with military precision. Company incoming, Johnson reported from his position. Lots of it. Santos activated her comm system. Santos, to Admiral Chun. We're aboard the enemy command ship, but encountering heavy resistance. Request immediate support from additional boarding parties. Negative, Gunny. Admiral Chin's voice crackled back. All other shuttles are engaged with defensive systems. You're on your own until we can clear a path for reinforcements. Understood, Mom. We'll make do. Santos looked at her 3 remaining squad members. For Marines against a ship the size of a city, crewed by an unknown number of hostile aliens, using weapons that could erase matter from existence. The odds were ridiculous. She smiled. All right, Marines. Time to do what we do best. Martinez, any luck with that interface? I think I've got something, Gunny. It's showing what might be a ship schematic, but the layout doesn't make sense. There are sections that seem to exist in folded space, and the command area appears to be. He paused, studying the alien display. This can't be right. What is it? According to this, the command center is at the geometric center of the ship. But to get there, we'd have to travel through sections that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Santos considered this. In her 15 years of service, she had learned that the universe was full of things that didn't make sense until you experienced them directly. Can you plot a route? Maybe. But, Gunny, the ship is actively reconfiguring itself. These corridors are moving, changing shape and position. We might get there and find ourselves trapped. Or we might get there and stop 47 million people from being invaded by hostiles. I'll take those odds. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Through the intersection ahead, Santos could see movement in multiple corridors. The enemy was coordinating their response, trying to surround the human boarding party. Martinez, download whatever you can from that interface, and let's move. We'll navigate as we go. They advanced deeper into the ship, following Martinez's improvised maps through corridors that defied Euclidean geometry. Gravity shifted without warning, walls became floors, and several times they found themselves walking on what should have been the ceiling. The ship wasn't just alien, it existed partially outside normal space-time. Movement ahead, Johnson whispered as they approached another intersection. This time, the enemy was ready for them. Energy beams lanced down the corridor before the Marines could take cover, and Santos felt her left shoulder armor simply vanish as one of the dark energy weapons found its mark. "Suppressive fire," she ordered, ignoring the pain where the beam had grazed her. "Advance by teams." The Marines moved with deadly precision, their weapons chattering as they laid down overlapping fields of fire. The enemy's energy weapons were devastating, but they required direct line of sight and seemed to have limited charge capacity. The humans' kinetic rounds, on the other hand, could ricochet around corners and punch through most forms of cover. "Clear," Jackson reported as the last enemy fell. "Casualties." Johnson took a graze on his left leg, but he's mobile. "You're bleeding, Gunny." Santos looked down at her shoulder where the enemy beam had struck. The armor was simply gone, as if it had never existed, and the exposed skin beneath was badly burned. But she could still use the arm, and they had bigger problems. "I'll live." "Martinez, how much further to the command center?" "According to the map, we should be able to reach it through that corridor." "But Gunny," he hesitated. "Spit it out, Corporal." "The readings I'm getting from ahead suggest massive energy concentrations. Whatever they're using to power this ship, it's unlike anything in our databases." Santos nodded grimly. In her experience, alien superweapons usually meant alien super guardians to protect them. "Then, we'd better move fast. Every minute we waste is another 1,000 boarding pods heading for New Thesha." They advanced through corridors that seemed to stretch and compress like living tissue. The ship's organic architecture became more pronounced the deeper they went, until it was unclear whether they were inside a vessel or some enormous creature. "Jesus," Jackson muttered as they entered what appeared to be a vast chamber. "What the hell is this thing?" The command center defied description. It was simultaneously a mechanical control room and a living organism. Walls pulsed with veins of energy. Control interfaces grew from the floor like crystalline trees, and at the center of it all stood something that might once have been a chair, but now resembled a throne made of living darkness. And seated on that throne was the enemy commander. It was humanoid in the same way that a nightmare might be humanoid, possessing the correct number of limbs, but arranged in ways that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, bypassing their translators to communicate directly with their minds. "Foolish creatures," it said without moving its mouth. "You cannot comprehend what you have stumbled into. This vessel is beyond your understanding, as are we." "Maybe," Santos replied, raising her weapon, "but I understand how to make things stop moving when I shoot them enough." The being's laughter was the sound of stars dying. "Your primitive kinetic weapons are useless here. This chamber exists partially outside your reality. Your projectiles will pass through us like shadows." Santos smiled and activated her comm system. "Admiral Chun, this is Santos. We found a command center, but we have a problem. The enemy commander claims our weapons won't work in here due to dimensional effects." "Copy that, Gunny. Stand by for tactical support." The being on the throne leaned forward with interest. "Your admiral cannot help you here, human. This space is protected by forces your species has not yet discovered." "Maybe," Santos admitted. "But you know what? I bet you still need air to breathe." She pulled a grenade from her belt, Not one of the standard fragmentation devices, but a specialized atmospheric dispersal unit designed for boarding actions. The enemy commander's confidence wavered as Santos armed the device. You would poison the air you breathe as well. Marine corps moto Santos replied cheerfully. Improvise, adapt, overcome. Martinez, the corporal, was already moving, his technical training allowing him to quickly identify what appeared to be atmospheric control systems among the organic control interfaces. On a gunny, you cannot stop the invasion, the alien commander said, its mental voice taking on notes of desperation. The boarding pods have already reached your precious world. Your people are dying as we speak. Maybe some of them, Santos acknowledged, but not all, and definitely not without taking a bunch of you bastards with them. She activated the grenade and tossed it toward the throne. The alien commander raised one impossibly long arm, and the device seemed to slow in mid-air as if moving through thick liquid. But Santos had counted on that. While the enemy focused on the grenade, Martinez completed his work on the atmospheric controls. The chamber's life support systems began shutting down, venting atmosphere into space. Impossible, the commander gasped as its protective dimensional effects flickered. You cannot. This requires intelligence. Santos finished. Yeah, we get that a lot. Johnson, Jackson, light it up. The Marines opened fire simultaneously, their weapons chattering as kinetic rounds found their marks. The alien commander's scream was audible both mentally and physically as its form began to dissolve. The ship, it managed to say as it died. Without me, the ship will. The throne collapsed into shadows and dust. Immediately, the organic walls began to pulse erratically, and the floor tilted as artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. Martinez, Santos called out over the growing chaos. Can you access their communication systems? Working on it, Gunny. The corporal was frantically interfacing with multiple control nodes as the command center came apart around them. Got it. Broadcasting recall signal to all boarding pods. Will they respond? Unknown, but Martinez paused, studying the alien displays. Gunny, I'm reading massive power fluctuations throughout the ship. I think killing their commander destabilized whatever was holding this thing together. Through the chamber's transparent sections, Santos could see stars wheeling overhead as the ship began to tumble end over end. More ominously, she could see debris beginning to break away from the hull. Santos, to Admiral Chun, she called on her comm, mission accomplished. Enemy commander is down. Recall signal transmitted to boarding pods. But this ship is coming apart, and we need immediate extraction. Copy that, Gunny. Extraction en route. Hold your position. Santos looked around the disintegrating command center and laughed. Where the hell would we go, ma'am? The ship continued to tear itself apart around them. But, through the chaos, Santos could see something that made her smile. In the distance, the boarding pods that had been racing toward New Thesha were turning around, returning to their dying mother ship like lost children called home. Jackson, she said as another section of ceiling collapsed nearby. Remind me to put in for hazard pay when we get back. If we get back, Gunny. When? Santos corrected firmly. Marines don't die in alien command centers, Jackson. We die in bars, fighting over women and gambling debts. Above them, the sound of human engines grew louder as their extraction shuttle fought through the debris field to reach them. Admiral Chin's voice came over the comm one more time. Outstanding work, Marines. Now let's go home. As they waited for pickup, Gunnery Sergeant Santos looked around at her squad, battered, bleeding, and grinning like idiots. They had just saved 47 million people by walking into impossible odds and refusing to accept defeat. It was, she reflected, a pretty typical Tuesday for the Marine Corps. 6 months after the Battle of the Kalar Nebula, the Galactic Council convened for the first time in over a century. Representatives from 234 species gathered in the neutral space around the ancient station known as Concordia, their ships forming a complex orbital pattern that had taken weeks to negotiate. Ambassador Kethmaran of the Hegemony stood in the vast assembly hall, watching as delegates took their assigned positions. The hall itself was a marvel of engineering, with atmospheric zones calibrated for dozens of different environmental requirements and translation systems capable of handling over 400 languages simultaneously. But today, all attention was focused on the newest arrivals. The human delegation had come aboard 2 hours ago, and their presence had already changed the entire tone of the gathering. Ambassador Sarah Chun, The former admiral had been reassigned to diplomatic duties after the Kaler incident, sat calmly in the human section while conversations buzzed around her in a dozen languages. The floor recognizes the speaker of the Veltheri Collective, announced the council's AI moderator. Speaker Zexnal rose gracefully, her crystalline form catching and refracting the hall's carefully balanced lighting. Honored delegates, we have gathered to address a question that affects us all. The emergence of this human species has fundamentally altered the balance of power in our region of the galaxy. Murmurs of agreement echoed from several species sections. The Veltheri were one of the oldest civilizations in the Council, and their words carried significant weight. In the past 6 months, Zexnal continued, these humans have established patrol bases in 17 sectors, destroyed 3 separate pirate fleets, and responded to over 40 distress calls. Their military capabilities appear to exceed our most advanced civilizations, yet they claim to seek nothing but peaceful coexistence. The speaker paused, her attention turning toward the human section. We must ask ourselves, what do they truly want? No species develops such military power without imperial ambitions. Ambassador Chen rose smoothly from her seat. May I respond, Speaker Zexnal? The floor recognizes Ambassador Chen of Earth. Thank you. Chen moved to the central speaking area, her simple diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and environmental suits worn by other delegates. The speaker raises valid concerns about our intentions, and I appreciate the opportunity to address them directly. She activated a holographic display showing a 3-dimensional map of the local galactic region. Red markers indicated recent human operations. 6 months ago, we received a distress call from the hegemony research vessel Kethmoran. Our response to that call has led to exactly what Speaker Zexnal described, increased human presence throughout this region. But I would like to provide some context for our actions. The display shifted, showing shipping routes and incident reports spanning the past 5 years. This sector has experienced a 47% increase in piracy over the past standard period. Merchant vessels have been forced to travel in armed convoys. Research missions have been canceled due to security concerns. Trade routes that once carried prosperity to hundreds of worlds have been abandoned. Representative Vorak of the Hegemony Security Council stood up. Ambassador Chun speaks truly. Our own patrol forces were insufficient to protect our shipping lanes. The human intervention has restored safety to routes we had written off as lost. But at what cost? Demanded Counselor THYSS of the Reptilian Alliance. These humans have deployed military forces across sovereign space without formal treaties or agreements. Their actions, however beneficial, represent a unilateral assumption of authority. Ambassador Chen nodded respectfully. Counselor THYSS raises an important point about sovereignty and proper diplomatic protocols. However, I would note that every human operation has been conducted either in unclaimed space or at the specific request of the local government. Request. THYSS hissed. When a civilization possesses overwhelming military superiority, can any request truly be considered voluntary? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. It was the core issue that had brought the council together. How to deal with a species that possessed the power to dictate terms but chose not to exercise it. May I tell you a story? Ambassador Chen asked quietly. Speaker Zexnal consulted with her advisory staff through rapid light pulse communication, then nodded. The council will hear your story, Ambassador. 300 years ago, my homeworld faced a global crisis. Environmental collapse, resource depletion, and international conflicts that threatened to destroy our entire civilization. We had 2 choices: develop the technology to expand beyond our planet, or face extinction. The holographic display shifted again, showing images of Earth during its industrial transition period. Cities choked with pollution, vast areas of environmental devastation, and refugee populations fleeing climate disasters. We chose expansion, but with it came a realization that has shaped human policy ever since. The universe is vast and dangerous, filled with threats that no single world can face alone. We survived only because we learned to work together, to help each other, to treat the survival of one as the survival of all. A touching philosophy, Counselor THYSS said dryly. But philosophy does not explain military fleets operating across galactic distances, doesn't it? Chen replied. Counselor, how many species represented in this chamber have faced existential threats in the past century? Natural disasters, resource depletion, hostile neighbors, technological accidents. An uncomfortable silence settled over the assembly. Every species present had stories of close calls with extinction, of times when her civilization had teetered on the edge of collapse. The colony hegemony lost their home world to stellar collapse 50 years ago, Chun continued. The Thraxian Republic fought a devastating war against bioweapons that claimed 60% of their population. The Velthari Collective survived a runaway artificial intelligence that consumed 3 of their core systems. With each example, representatives from the mentioned species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. These were not public histories, but classified information that most species preferred to forget. How do you know these things? Speaker Zexnal demanded. Because in every case, Earth send aid, Chen replied simply. Medical supplies for the bioweapon crisis. Engineering teams for stellar evacuation. Cybersecurity specialists for AI containment. We've been helping for over a century, usually quietly and without recognition, because that's what decent beings do for each other. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly. Delegates began activating personal communication devices, checking historical records, and intelligence files. The pattern Chun described would be easy to verify or disprove. That's impossible, Representative Colvass of the Maritime Confederation said. We have no record of Earth contact during our coral plague epidemic 40 years ago. Medical transport ship Nightingale, Chen replied immediately. Captain Rodriguez delivered experimental treatments that saved your reef cities. You recorded them as coming from unknown benefactors because we asked you not to publicize our involvement. Colvass was already accessing his government's classified archives. After a moment, his aquatic features rippled with shock. The treatment formulations, the genetic markers, they match no known species in our databases. But if they came from humans, they work because we've encountered similar biological crises before, Chun finished. We share our solutions because everyone benefits when civilizations survive and thrive. Counselor THYSS was not convinced. Even accepting your claims about humanitarian aid, you still haven't explained your military capabilities. No civilization develops such forces purely for defensive purposes. Ambassador Chun was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Counselor THYSS is correct. Our military capabilities far exceed what would be necessary for self-defense. But they're not built for conquest, they are built for protection. The holographic display changed one final time, showing a star map so vast that it required several moments to comprehend its scale. Hundreds of galaxies, thousands of star systems, all connected by lines representing human patrol routes and response networks. This is the scope of human operations, Chen announced. 417 civilizations under our protection, 612 patrol sectors, over 50,000 ships on active deployment across 11 galaxies. The numbers struck the assembly like physical blows. The combined military might of the entire Galactic Council represented fewer than 1,000 ships operating across a single galaxy. You're telling us, Speaker Zexnal said slowly, that this entire region, all of our civilizations combined, represent less than 1% of human operations. Approximately 0.7%, actually, Chen confirmed. But percentages aren't the point. Every one of those civilizations, including yours, represents millions or billions of individual lives. Each one matters. But why? The question came from Representative Ashan of the Pacifist Coalition, her normally serene features twisted with confusion. What does Earth gain from protecting so many others? Ambassador Chun smiled, and in that expression was the same confidence that Gunnery Sergeant Santos had shown when facing impossible odds, the same determination that Admiral Chun had displayed when ordering Marines into certain death. Representative Ashan, what does anyone gain for being decent? What profit is there in helping a stranger? What tactical advantage comes from saving lives? She gestured toward the vast assembly, taking in representatives from species that spanned the spectrum of galactic evolution. We do it because it's right. Because every civilization that survives and grows makes the universe a little brighter, a little more interesting, a little more wonderful. Because when someone sends out a distress call, there should always be someone ready to answer. The silence that followed was profound. For several minutes, The only sound in the vast assembly hall was the gentle hum of environmental systems maintaining life for dozens of species. Finally, Speaker Zexnall rose again. Ambassador Chun, your words are unexpected, but words alone cannot address the concerns of this council. We need guarantees, formal agreements, some assurance that human power will not be misused. What guarantees would satisfy you? Chun asked. Formal treaties limiting human expansion. Oversight committees to monitor your military deployments. Perhaps integration of council representatives into your command structure. Ambassador Chun nodded thoughtfully. I understand the desire for such agreements, Speaker Zexnall, but I'm afraid Earth policy prohibits formal military alliances or integrated command structures. Why? Because every species has the right to determine its own destiny. The moment we begin making formal agreements about protection and military cooperation, we stop being helpers and start being overlords. Chen walked back toward her delegation, then turned for one final statement. However, I can offer something better than treaties or oversight committees. I can offer you the same thing we offer every civilization we encounter. Our assistance when you need it, our friendship when you want it, and our respect for your sovereignty always. She activated a small device on her wrist, and immediately holographic displays appeared in front of every delegation showing detailed technical specifications. Complete plans for kinetic weapons systems, defensive shields, and faster-than-light communications. Freely given, with no strings attached. Use them to protect yourselves, share them with your allies, improve them however you see fit. The assembly erupted in chaos as delegates realized they were looking at military technology centuries in advance of their own capabilities. Technology that could revolutionize galactic warfare, freely handed over without negotiation or payment. But Counselor THYSS managed to say over the noise, "This makes no strategic sense. You're giving away your technological advantages." "Counselor," Ambassador Chen replied with a smile, "you're assuming that what I just gave you represents our best technology. It doesn't. But it's good enough to let you protect yourselves against most threats." She paused at the exit, looking back at the stunned assembly. "And if you ever face something worse than you can handle, just send out a distress call. We'll be listening." 1 year later, the Galactic Council voted unanimously to establish the Chun Protocol, a mutual aid agreement based on human principles of voluntary assistance and sovereign respect. It was the first time in Council history that a non-member species had a diplomatic protocol named after them. More importantly, for the first time in centuries, trade routes throughout the region operated without armed escorts. Piracy dropped to nearly zero. Research missions launched into previously forbidden sectors. And in 17 patrol bases scattered across the region, human crews maintained their quiet vigil, ready to answer the next distress call, ready to step out of the smoke once more whenever someone needed help. In the depths of space, the universe seemed a little less dark and a little less dangerous, because somewhere among the stars, there were beings who had made protecting others their defining purpose. The Marines would have approved.